The Draconith warship cut through the darkness of space like a blade made of black iron and ancient hunger. And its scanners had found something interesting drifting near. The Outer Rim Commander Virithus stood at the bridge viewport with his claws folded behind his back, watching the tiny vessel tumble through the void. And smoke curled from his nostrils as he considered what pathetic species might be aboard. The Draconith Empire had ruled 12 star systems for 10,000 years, and they had seen many civilizations rise and fall like grass before the wind. But this ship bore markings they had only recently learned to recognize humans. His second officer growled, and the word dripped with contempt. Virithus tilted his massive head and let flames flicker between his teeth as he smiled. Because humans were new to the galactic stage, and everyone knew they were soft and weak and short-lived creatures, barely worth noticing. "Bring it aboard," Virithus commanded, and his voice echoed through the bridge like thunder in a cave. "I want to see what manner of prey has wandered into our hunting grounds." The cargo vessel was small and damaged, and clearly dying. And when the Draconith boarding party cut through its hull, they expected to find corpses, or perhaps some terrified creatures begging for mercy. What they found instead was a single human male slumped over the emergency beacon controls with blood on his face and radiation burns on his arms. And somehow he was still breathing, even though his ship had been drifting for what looked like many days. His name was Marcus Webb, and he had been an engineer on a transport vessel that had suffered a catastrophic reactor failure. And he had put everyone else in the escape pods before staying behind to send the distress signal that would guide rescuers to his crewmates. He had not expected to survive, and he certainly had not expected to be found by dragons. Marcus opened his eyes to find himself staring up at a ceiling made of dark metal, carved with symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. And when he tried to move, he discovered that his wrists were bound with chains that hummed with energy. A face appeared above him, and it was not a human face at all. The creature was reptilian and massive, with scales the color of dried blood and eyes that burned like molten gold. And when it spoke, its breath was hot enough to make Marcus flinch. "So the little mammal wakes," the creature said, and his voice was deep and rumbling like stones grinding together. "I am told your kind calls itself human. Is this correct?" Marcus swallowed hard and nodded because his throat was too dry for words. "I am Lord Virithus of the Draconith Empire, and you are now my property," the dragon said. And there was no cruelty in his tone because he was simply stating a fact the way one might observe that water is wet. "You will be taken to my estate on Kethalar, where you will work until you die, which should not take long given how fragile your species appears to be." Marcus wanted to argue or fight or do something brave and defiant, but he was weak from radiation sickness and hunger, and he knew that resistance would only get him killed faster, so he simply nodded again and let them drag him away. The fortress moon of Kethalar was a place of dark stone and eternal twilight, where the Draconith elite kept their estates and raised their young. And Virithus's compound was one of the largest and most feared. Marcus was given a small room in the servant quarters and assigned to repair broken equipment throughout the estate. And the work was hard, but it kept him alive and gave him purpose. He learned quickly that the Draconith valued strength above all things and despised weakness in any form. And he learned that showing fear would only invite more abuse from the guards who watched him constantly. But he also learned something else during those first weeks on Kethalar. He learned about the hatchling. Sereth was the youngest of Virithus's brood, and he was small for his age, with scales that had not yet hardened to the dark iron color of adult Draconith. And he moved through the estate like a shadow, trying desperately not to be seen. Marcus first noticed him hiding in a storage room while he was repairing a broken heating unit. And the little dragon had frozen when their eyes met like a rabbit caught in headlights. But what caught Marcus's attention was not the fear in the hatchling's eyes. It was the object. Clutched in his small claws, the hatchling was holding a toy spacecraft, and even from across the room Marcus could see that it was broken badly, with its wings snapped off and its hull cracked and pieces missing from what looked like a tiny engine assembly. Sareth hissed at Marcus and backed away with the broken toy pressed against his chest like it was the most precious thing in the universe. And then he turned and fled into the shadows before Marcus could say a word. Over the following days, Marcus saw the hatchling again and again, always hiding in corners and crawl spaces and forgotten rooms, and always clutching that broken toy like his life depended on it. The other servants told Marcus to ignore the runt because paying attention to Virithus's weakest son would only bring trouble. But Marcus could not stop thinking about the look in the little dragon's eyes. It was a look he recognized. It was the look of someone who had been broken, and who was desperately trying to hold the pieces together. Marcus had seen that look in the mirror after his wife had died 3 years ago, and he had seen it in the eyes of the young engineers he had trained who were terrified of failing, and he had seen it in the faces of refugees fleeing from wars that had destroyed everything they loved. It was the look of someone who needed help but had learned that no help was coming. One night Marcus finished his work early and walked through the lower corridors of the estate where few others bothered to go, and he found Sareth curled in a corner with smoke rising from his nostrils in what Marcus had learned was a sign of distress. The hatchling was staring at his broken toy and making a soft keening sound that reminded Marcus of a child crying. Marcus sat down on the cold stone floor about 10 feet away and did not speak or move closer because he knew that frightened creatures needed space. Sareth looked up at him with wide, golden eyes full of fear and suspicion. "I am not going to hurt you," Marcus said quietly, and he kept his hands where the hatchling could see them. "I am not going to take your toy either. I promise." The hatchling did not respond, but he did not run away either, and that was enough for now. Marcus did not push the hatchling to trust him because he understood that trust was something that had to be earned slowly, like water wearing away at stone. Every evening after his work was finished, he would walk through the lower corridors and sit in the same spot near where Sareth liked to hide, and he would work on small projects he had brought with him, like fixing a broken datapad or rewiring a damaged light fixture. He never spoke directly to the hatchling unless Sareth approached him first, and he never made sudden movements or loud noises that might frighten the little dragon away. It took 2 weeks before Sareth moved close enough to watch what Marcus was doing, and it took another week before the hatchling finally spoke. "What are you making?" Sareth asked in a voice that was high and soft compared to the rumbling bass of adult Draconith. Marcus held up the small device he was working on and showed it to the curious hatchling without moving any closer. "It is a music player," Marcus explained, and he pressed a button that made soft melodies pour from the tiny speaker. "My people like to listen to music when we work because it makes the time pass easier." Sareth tilted his head in a gesture that Marcus had learned meant confusion or interest. "Your people make sounds for no purpose," the hatchling said, and it was not quite a question. "We make sounds because they make us feel things," Marcus replied with a small smile. "Happy sounds and sad sounds and sounds that make us want to dance. Your people do not have music." The hatchling shook his head slowly and smoke curled from his nostrils. "We have war chants," Sareth said, "songs of conquest and victory. But Father says those are for warriors, and I am not allowed to learn them yet." There was something in the way the hatchling said the word father that made Marcus's heart ache, because it was the same way he had heard abused children talk about their parents. Back on Earth, he did not ask about it directly because he knew that would only make Seraph retreat back into his shell instead. He changed the subject. "That toy you carry," Marcus said carefully. "It looks like a spacecraft. Where did you get it?" Seraph's claws tightened around the broken ship, and his eyes darted to the shadows like he was preparing to run. "I will not take it from you," Marcus reminded him gently. "I am just curious because I used to work on real spacecraft, and I have never seen a design quite like that one." The hatchling stared at Marcus for a long moment as if trying to decide whether the human could be trusted. And then slowly he began to speak. "There was a visit," Seraph said, and his voice was barely louder than a whisper. "Creatures from another empire came to talk with Father about trade agreements and borders and other things I did not understand." Marcus nodded to show he was listening. "One of them brought a child," Seraph continued. "A small creature with fur instead of scales and eyes that were very large. And the child was carrying this ship." The hatchling held up the broken toy and looked at it with an expression of such profound sadness that Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I had never seen anything like it," Seraph said. "It was beautiful, and it could fly on its own, and it had little lights inside that made it glow. And I could not stop staring at it." "What happened?" Marcus asked softly. "The furry child saw me watching," Seraph said, and a hint of wonder crept into his voice. "And she walked over to me, even though I was hiding behind a pillar. And she held out the ship and said I could have it." The hatchling's eyes grew distant with memory. "No one had ever given me anything before," Seraph whispered. "My siblings take what they want, and my father says that giving gifts is weakness. But this strange creature just smiled and put the ship in my claws and said she hoped it would make me happy." Marcus felt something hot behind his eyes, and he blinked hard to keep it from showing. "It did make me happy," Seraph said. "For 47 days, it was the most wonderful thing I had ever owned. And I kept it with me always, and I would watch it fly around my room and pretend that I was inside it traveling to distant stars." The hatchling's voice grew quiet, and the smoke from his nostrils turned dark and thick. "Then my brothers found out." Marcus did not need to ask what had happened next because he could see it in the broken wings and the cracked hull and the missing pieces that had been torn away by claws much larger than Seraph's. "They said I was weak for treasuring a prey species trinket," Seraph said. And there was no anger in his voice anymore, just a hollow emptiness that was somehow worse. "They knocked it from my claws and stepped on it and laughed while I tried to gather the pieces." "Did you tell your father?" Marcus asked, even though he already knew the answer. "He said they were right," Seraph replied, and a small flame flickered between his teeth before dying out. "He said attachment to broken things was beneath our kind, and that I should throw it away and forget it ever existed." The hatchling curled his tail around his feet and pressed the broken toy against his chest. "But I could not," Seraph said. "I know it is broken, and I know it will never fly again, and I know that keeping it makes me weak. But it was a gift, and the furry child smiled when she gave it to me, and I cannot make myself throw it away." Marcus was quiet for a long moment as he watched the small dragon clutch his broken treasure. And he thought about all the broken things he had fixed in his life and all the broken people he had tried to help. "May I see it?" Marcus asked finally. And he held out his hands with the palms facing up so Seraph could see he meant no threat. The hatchling hesitated for so long that Marcus thought he would refuse. But then slowly and carefully, Seraph placed the broken ship in the human's hands. Marcus examined it closely and saw that it was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship even in its damaged state, with delicate engravings on the hull and tiny windows that had once held some kind of glowing material. The wings had been snapped clean off, and the engine assembly in the back was missing several crucial components. But the basic structure was still sound. "This is Valorian work," Marcus said as he turned the ship over in his hands. "I recognize the design style from some trade catalogs I saw years ago. They are famous for their precision engineering." Sareth nodded, but did not speak. Marcus looked at the broken toy, and then at the broken hatchling who had been told his whole life that caring about things was weakness. And he made a decision. I think I can fix this. Marcus said. Sareth's eyes went wide, and the smoke stopped rising from his nostrils. You cannot, the hatchling said. But there was a desperate hope beneath the denial. The wings are destroyed and the engine is missing pieces, and no one here knows how to repair alien technology. Marcus smiled and handed the ship back to Sareth with careful hands. I am an engineer, Marcus said. Fixing broken things is what I do, and I have been doing it for a very long time. The hatchling stared at him with an expression that Marcus could not quite read. Why would you help me? Sareth asked. I am nothing to you. I am weak and small, and my own family thinks I am worthless. Marcus thought about how to answer that question and decided that the truth was the only thing worth giving, because someone once helped me when I was broken. Marcus said quietly, and because kindness does not need a reason. Sareth looked down at his broken toy and then back up at the strange soft creature who had just offered to do something no one else would. You really think you can fix it? The hatchling whispered. I really think I can try. Marcus replied, and for the first time since Marcus had arrived on Keth Ayler, he saw something other than fear in the little dragon's eyes. He saw hope. Marcus began gathering materials the very next day, and he worked carefully to avoid drawing attention, because he knew that the guards would not approve of a slave spending his free time on personal projects. He collected scraps of metal from the repair jobs he was assigned, and he traded his water rations for small tools that the other servants had stolen or found over the years. And slowly he assembled everything he would need. Sareth watched from the shadows at first, because he still did not fully trust the human. But as the days passed, he began to move closer, until finally he was sitting right next to Marcus at the small workbench the human had set up in an abandoned storage room. What are you doing now? Sareth asked as Marcus carefully shaped a piece of salvaged alloy with tools that seemed far too large for his soft fingers. I'm making a new wing, Marcus explained without looking up from his work. The original ones were too damaged to repair, so I need to build replacements from scratch. The hatchling leaned in to watch more closely, and his golden eyes reflected the dim light from Marcus's work lamp. How do you know what shape to make them? Sareth asked. You told me what they look like, Marcus replied, and I have been studying the attachment points on the hull to understand how they were connected. The Valorians used a very clever design that allows the wings to fold back. During landing, Sareth was quiet for a moment, and then he spoke in a voice that was hesitant and unsure. I did not think you were really listening when I described them. Marcus paused his work and looked at the little dragon with gentle eyes. I always listen, Marcus said, even when it seems like I am focused on something else. People matter more than things, and what you tell me matters. The hatchling did not respond, but his tail curled around his feet in what Marcus had learned was a sign of comfort. Rather than distress, they fell into a routine over the following weeks, and Marcus found himself looking forward to the evenings when he could work on the ship, with Sareth watching beside him. The hatchling asked endless questions about human engineering, and human tools and human ways of solving problems. And Marcus answered every one of them as best he could. Why do you have so many different tools? Sareth asked one night, as Marcus laid out his collection on the workbench. Draconith used their claws for everything. Human hands are not as strong as Draconith claws, Marcus explained. So we make tools that let us do things our bodies cannot do on their own. This wrench lets me grip things tighter than my fingers can manage. And this saw lets me cut through metal that would break my fingernails, Sareth considered this information with the serious expression of a scholar examining a new theory. So your weakness made you clever. The hatchling said. Marcus laughed softly and nodded his head. That is one way to look at it, Marcus agreed. Humans have always been good at finding ways around our limitations. We cannot fly, so we build ships that carry us through the sky. We cannot breathe underwater, so we build suits that let us explore the ocean. We cannot survive in space, so we build stations that keep us alive among the stars. That seems like a lot of work, Sareth said. It is, Marcus admitted. But the work is worth it because it lets us go places and do things that would otherwise be impossible. The hatchling was quiet for a long moment, and then he asked a question that made Marcus's heart ache. Do humans ever feel weak? Marcus set down his tools and gave Sareth his full attention because he understood that this question was about more than just humans. All the time. Marcus said honestly, we feel weak and scared and uncertain about whether we can handle the challenges in front of us. But we have learned that feeling weak is not the same as being weak. Sareth tilted his head in confusion. Strength is not about never feeling afraid. Marcus continued. Strength is about choosing to act even when you are afraid. It is about getting back up after you fall down and trying again even when you think you might fail. Father says fear is weakness. Sareth said quietly, your father is wrong. Marcus replied, and he said it with such simple certainty that the hatchling blinked in surprise. Fear is just information that tells you something matters. What you do with that fear is what defines you. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Marcus returned to his work on the ship. The restoration took 3 weeks in total, and there were moments when Marcus thought he might not be able to finish it. The engine assembly was the hardest part because several critical components were missing, and Marcus had to fabricate replacements from materials that were never meant for such delicate work. He stayed up late many nights running calculations in his head and testing different configurations until finally he found a solution that worked. The wings came together more easily once he understood the Valorian design philosophy, and he spent hours carefully shaping and polishing them until they matched Sareth's description as closely as possible. The hull required patches where the cracks had weakened the structure, and Marcus used techniques he had learned from repairing damaged spacecraft to reinforce the toy without changing its appearance. The final piece was the cockpit glass, which had been shattered beyond repair. And Marcus traded his food rations for an entire week to obtain a small polished crystal from one of the other servants who collected such things. You should not have done that, Sareth said when he learned what Marcus had given up. You need food to survive. I will be fine. Marcus assured him. Humans are tougher than we look, and I have gone hungry before for less important reasons. On the night, Marcus finally finished the restoration he called Sareth to the workbench and covered the completed ship with a cloth. Are you ready? Marcus asked. The hatchling nodded, but his claws were trembling, and smoke was rising from his nostrils in thin, nervous wisps. Marcus pulled away the cloth and revealed the ship in all its restored glory. The new wings gleamed in the lamplight, and the patched hull looked almost as good as new. And the crystal cockpit caught the light and scattered tiny rainbows across the walls of the storage room. Sareth stared at his toy with wide, unblinking eyes, and his mouth hung open in an expression of pure wonder. It is beautiful, the hatchling whispered. Hold out your claws. Marcus said Sareth did as he was told, and Marcus carefully placed the ship in the little dragon's hands. Now press the small button on the bottom. Marcus instructed Sareth press the button, and the tiny anti-gravity engine that Marcus had, rebuilt from scraps, hummed to life with a soft whirring sound. The ship rose from Sareth's palms and floated in the air between them. Its new wings spread wide, and its lights glowing softly from within. Then it began to fly. It circled the room in smooth, graceful loops, just as Sareth had described. And the hatchling watched it with tears streaming down his scaled face. Marcus had not known that Draconith could cry. Sareth made a sound that started deep in his chest and bubbled up through his throat. And it took Marcus a moment to realize that the little dragon was laughing. It was the first time Marcus had ever heard a Draconith laughed, and it was one of the most beautiful sounds he had ever heard. "Thank you," Sareth said, and his voice cracked with emotion. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," Marcus smiled, and watched the ship fly around the room and knew that this moment was worth every sacrifice he had made. "You are welcome, little one," Marcus said softly. "You are very welcome." For 12 wonderful days, Sareth was happier than he had ever been in his entire life. He would sneak down to the storage room every evening to fly his ship around the small space, while Marcus watched with a smile on his face. And sometimes the human would tell stories about the places he had traveled and the things he had seen among the stars. Sareth began to believe that maybe his father was wrong about humans, and maybe he was wrong about weakness too, because Marcus was the kindest person Sareth had ever known, and kindness did not feel weak at all. But happiness never lasts forever, and secrets have a way of being discovered. It was Sareth's oldest brother, Corax, who found them. Corax was everything a Draconith was supposed to be, with scales as dark as a black hole and flames that burned blue with intensity. And he had always taken special pleasure in tormenting his youngest sibling. He had come to the lower corridors, looking for supplies to repair his training weapons, when he heard the sound of laughter coming from the abandoned storage room. When he pushed open the door and saw his runt brother playing with the human slave, his eyes went wide with shock and then narrow with cruel delight. "Well, well, well," Corax said as he stepped into the room. "What do we have here?" Sareth grabbed his ship from the air and pressed it against his chest, while Marcus rose slowly to his feet with his hands held away from his body in a non-threatening posture. "This is none of your concern, Corax," Sareth said, but his voice trembled and smoke poured from his nostrils in thick, dark clouds. "Oh, but it is my concern, little brother," Corax replied with a smile that showed far too many teeth. "Father will be very interested to learn that you have been consorting with prey and playing with that pathetic trinket you were supposed to throw away." "Please," Sareth begged. "Please do not tell him." "And why should I keep your secret?" Corax asked as he moved closer. "What could you possibly offer me that would be worth more than watching Father punish you?" Sareth had no answer, because they both knew he had nothing to offer. Corax laughed and reached out to snatch the ship from his brother's claws. And when Sareth tried to pull away, the larger dragon grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Still protecting this worthless toy, Corax sneered. "You are pathetic. Let him go." The words were quiet and calm, but they cut through the air like a blade. And Corax turned to see the human standing with his fists clenched at his sides. "Did you just give me an order, slave?" Corax asked in a voice that dripped with disbelief. "I asked you to release him," Marcus said. "He has done nothing wrong." Corax dropped Sareth to the floor and turned his full attention to the human who dared to speak to him as an equal. "You have forgotten your place, prey," Corax growled, and flames began to flicker between his teeth. "Perhaps I should remind you." Marcus did not back down, even though every instinct in his body was screaming at him to run. "He is just a child," Marcus said, "and that toy is the only kindness anyone has ever shown him. Why does that threaten you so much?" Corax roared and lunged forward, and his claws raked across Marcus's chest before the human could even try to dodge. Marcus fell to the ground with blood soaking through his shirt, and Corax stood over him with murder in his eyes. "I am going to enjoy killing you slowly." Corax snarled. "No," Sareth screamed, and he threw himself at his brother with all the strength his small body could muster. It was not much, and Corax barely stumbled, but it was enough to draw his attention away from Marcus. "You dare," Corax hissed as he grabbed Sareth by the neck again. "You dare attack me for a human? Leave him alone," Sareth gasped. "He is my friend." The words seemed to stun Corax into momentary silence, because friendship was not a concept that Draconith spoke of often. And then his face twisted into an expression of disgust. "Father will hear of this," Korak said, "and you will both pay for your weakness." He threw Sareth against the wall and stormed out of the storage room with the promise of violence hanging in the air. Behind him, Sareth rushed to Marcus's side and tried to stop the bleeding with his small claws. But the wounds were deep and the human's face was growing pale. "I am sorry," Sareth sobbed. "I am so sorry. This is all my fault." "Not your fault," Marcus managed to say through the pain. "Never your fault. The guards came within the hour and they dragged Marcus away without gentleness or care." And Sareth followed them through the corridors, screaming. For them to stop Lord Virithus was waiting in the execution yard when they arrived. He stood like a mountain of dark scales and ancient power with flames burning in his eyes and smoke rising from his nostrils, like the breath of a volcano. And when he saw the human being dragged before him, his lip curled in contempt. "So this is the creature that has corrupted my son," Virithus said, and his voice was cold and terrible. "Father, please," Sareth begged as he threw himself at Virithus's feet. "He did nothing wrong. He only helped me fix my toy." "Silence," Virithus roared, and the force of his voice made Sareth flinch. "You have embarrassed me enough with your weakness. I will not allow this human to make it worse." He gestured to the guards, and they forced Marcus to his knees on the cold stone of the yard. "You will die slowly," Virithus told the human, as an example to any who would corrupt Draconith youth with prey species sentiment. Marcus looked up at the ancient dragon, who held his life in his claws, and he felt no fear because he had done something good, and he would not regret it. "I fixed the toy," Marcus said simply. "I showed kindness to a child who had never known any. If that is a crime worthy of death, then your empire is weaker." "Then you know." Virithus raised his claw to strike, and Marcus closed his eyes and waited for the end. "Stop." The voice was small and shaking, but it rang out across the execution yard with unexpected force. Sareth had placed himself between his father and the human. The little dragon was trembling so badly that his scales rattled against each other, and tears were streaming down his face. But he did not move. "Get out of the way," Virithus commanded. "No," Sareth said. The single word seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the yard. "What did you say to me?" Virithus asked. And his voice was quiet now, which was somehow more terrifying than when he roared. "I said no," Sareth repeated. And his voice grew stronger, even as his body continued to shake. "I will not let you kill him. He is a slave and you are my son," Virithus said. "You would defy me for this creature." "He is my friend," Sareth said. "He is the only one who has ever been kind to me. He fixed my ship when everyone else told me to throw it away, and he listened to me when everyone else told me to be quiet, and he treated me like I mattered when my own family treats me like I am worthless." Virithus stared at his smallest son with an expression that Marcus could not read. "You taught me that kindness is weakness," Sareth continued. "But Marcus showed me that kindness is strength, because it takes courage to care about others when the world tells you not to." The little dragon straightened his spine and met his father's eyes with a fire that had never been there before. "Any fool with claws can break things," Sareth said. "Marcus made something whole again. Can you say the same, Father? Can any of us say the same?" The yard was completely silent, except for the sound of the wind moving through the dark. Stone's Virithus looked at his son and then at the human kneeling on the ground and then back at his son again, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the Lord of Cathalar did not know what to say. Lord Virithus did not execute Marcus that day. Instead, he dismissed the guards and retreated to his private chambers, where he remained alone for 3 full days without eating or speaking to anyone. The servants whispered that something had broken inside the ancient dragon, and others whispered that something had awakened But no one knew for certain what was happening behind those closed doors. Marcus was taken to the medical wing where Draconith healers treated his wounds with surprising gentleness. And Sarah stayed by his side through every moment of the recovery, despite the protests of the staff. "You should go," Marcus said weakly on the second day. "Your father might still change his mind and decide to punish you. Then he will have to punish me," Sareth replied. "I am not leaving you alone." Marcus smiled despite the pain in his chest because he had never seen these little dragons show such courage before on the fourth day. Virithas emerged from his chambers and summoned both the human and his son to the great hall of the estate. Marcus had to lean on Sarath's shoulder as they walked through the corridors because his wounds had not fully healed, and the little dragon supported him without complaint. The great hall was empty, except for Virithas, who stood before the massive fireplace with his back turned to them. "Leave us," Virithas said to the servants who had escorted them in, and the doors closed with a heavy thud that echoed through the cavernous space. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Virithas turned to face them, and Marcus saw something in the ancient dragon's eyes that he had never expected to see: uncertainty. "I have ruled this estate for 3,000 years, Virithas said, and his voice was quieter than Marcus had ever heard it. "I have conquered worlds and crushed rebellions and outlived enemies beyond counting. And in all that time I believed I understood strength." He walked slowly toward them and stopped a few feet away. "Strength was power," Virithas continued. "Strength was dominance and victory and the ability to destroy anything that opposed you. That is what I was taught, and that is what I taught my children." His eyes moved to Sareth, who stood with his chin raised and his spine straight. "But you challenged me," Virithas said. "You, my smallest and weakest child, stood before me and refused to move. And in that moment you showed more strength than your brothers have ever shown in all their years of training." Sareth did not respond, but his grip on Marcus's arm tightened. "I do not understand it," Virithas admitted. "I do not understand how kindness can be strength, or how fixing a broken toy can inspire such courage. But I cannot deny what I saw with my own eyes." He turned his attention to Marcus and studied the human with an intensity that made Marcus want to look away. "You are small and soft, and you will be dead within a century," Virithas said. "By Draconith standards you are nothing. And yet you made my son feel valued when I could not, and you gave him courage when I gave him only fear." Marcus found his voice despite his nervousness. "I only did what anyone should do," Marcus said. "I saw someone hurting, and I tried to help. That is what makes it remarkable," Virithas replied. "You expected nothing in return. You had no reason to help a Draconith child, except that he needed help, and you could provide it." The ancient dragon was silent for a long moment, and then he reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew Sarath's toy ship. Korax must have taken it during the confrontation and given it to his father. As evidence, Virithas held the ship up to the light and examined the careful repairs that Marcus had made. "This is skilled work," Virithas said. "The original craftsman would be impressed." He handed the ship to Sareth, who took it with trembling claws. "Keep it," Virithas said. "It seems I was wrong about what makes something worthless." Then he turned to Marcus, and his expression became formal and serious. "I am releasing you from servitude," Virithas announced. "You will be given a ship and supplies enough to reach human space, and you will leave Cathalar within the week." Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was mixed with something else, something like sadness. "Thank you," Marcus said. "But before I go, may I ask something?" Virithas nodded. "Will you treat Sareth differently now?" Marcus asked. "Will you give him the kindness he deserves?" The ancient dragon looked at his youngest son with an expression that was difficult to read. "I do not know how to be kind," Virithas admitted. "It is not something I have ever learned, but perhaps I can learn to be less cruel." It was not the answer Marcus had hoped for, but it was more than he had expected. The week passed quickly, and Marcus spent as much time with Seraph as he could, because he knew they might never see each other again. They talked about human worlds and draconic customs, and all the strange and wonderful things that existed in the galaxy. And sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence and watched the toy ship fly around the room on the day Marcus was scheduled to leave. Seraph came to him with something clutched in his small claws. "I want you to have this," Seraph said. And he held out a single scale that gleamed like polished obsidian. In the light, Marcus recognized it immediately, because he had learned enough about draconic culture to understand what it meant. "Seraph, I cannot accept this," Marcus said. "This is too precious." "You gave me back my ship," Seraph said. "You gave me courage and hope, and the knowledge that kindness is not weakness. This scale is nothing compared to what you gave me." Marcus took the scale with careful hands and felt its warmth against his palm. "Among my people, this is the highest honor one can give," Seraph explained. "It means that you are family. It means that no matter how far apart we are, you will always be part of me." Marcus felt tears burning in his eyes, and he did not try to hide them. "I will never forget you, little one," Marcus said. "You had better not," Seraph replied. And there was a hint of humor in his voice that had never been there before. "I expect you to come back someday and tell me about all the things you have fixed." Marcus laughed and pulled the little dragon into a hug that Seraph returned with surprising strength, and then it was time to go. Marcus boarded his ship and flew away from Cathalar with Seraph's scale hanging on a chain around his neck. And he watched the fortress moon grow smaller in his viewport until it was just another light among the stars. 50 years passed. The galaxy changed in ways that no one could have predicted, as old empires crumbled and new alliances formed, and a relationship between humans and Draconic evolved from hostility to cautious respect to something that almost resembled friendship. The architect of that transformation was a Draconic ambassador named Seraph, who had spent decades advocating for peace against the fierce opposition of traditionalists, who still believed that strength meant conquest. He was tall now, with scales hardened to obsidian and fire burning in his eyes, but around his neck, on a chain of star metal, hung a small toy ship with carefully restored wings. The Draconic Human Alliance was signed in the Hall of Burning Stars, and it marked the end of centuries of cold war and the beginning of a new era of cooperation. After the ceremony, Seraph approached a white-haired human who had traveled a very long way to witness this historic moment. Marcus Webb was old now, with wrinkles around his eyes and a stoop in his shoulders. But his smile was exactly the same as it had been 50 years ago in a forgotten storage room on a fortress moon. "Marcus Webb," Seraph said warmly. "Still fixing things, I see." Marcus laughed and clasped the dragon's hand with a grip that was still strong despite his age. "Someone has to, old friend," Marcus replied. "Someone has to." They stood together watching the delegates from 100 worlds celebrate the treaty that would change the galaxy forever. And neither of them needed to say what they were both thinking, that all of this had started with a broken toy and a human who refused to let broken things stay broken, because that is what humanity brings to the stars. Not weapons or conquest or the hunger for power, just hands that mend what is damaged, and hearts that refuse to give up on anyone. And sometimes that is enough to change everything.